Hey, what's up, y'all? This is Pastor B. Have you ever asked yourself, is the toil, the drive to produce content for social media, to be a content creator, is it really worth it? Have you ever asked that question, or is it just me? Well, today we're going to talk about the importance of your story, the importance of pushing through, even when things don't always feel comfortable, even when sometimes you may have a bit of a creative lull. All right. So thank y'all so much for tuning into the episode. And we're going to go ahead and get started right now. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Living from Sunday to Sunday podcast. I am your host, Pastor B. And thank you guys so much for listening and tuning into the podcast. Of course, this podcast can be found everywhere where podcasts are available. Please make sure that you download, like, and subscribe. Share this with your family and friends if you're watching this currently on YouTube. Please make sure that you click subscribe and click the little bell so that you're notified anytime that a new episode drops. Today's episode is an interesting one. Sometimes I go through creative lulls, right? It's easy to create and have things to talk about, but like when life gets busy, sometimes it can be a little challenging. And so, it's been a minute since I've done a podcast episode. But the one thing I think that my struggle is centered around is whether or not this is worth it, right? Whether or not being a quote unquote content creator, if being a content creator, if it's actually worth it. Like, is it worth the hassle? Is it the the worth the trouble? So this is February 23rd, I think, is when I'm recording this. Um, and unless you've been under a social media rock, you've heard about the story, the Risa story, where a young lady, she, in very explicit details, um, details the relationship that she has via COVID or through COVID with this young man. And she starts with the dating, the marriage, and then the subsequent divorce. And, she makes several disclaimers at the beginning. Now, it's a 54 episode, um, TikTok playlist, right? And like I said, she makes these disclaimers at the beginning, like, "Hey, this is going to take a while. There, I'm going to be honest." And one of the key things that she says is that I am going to tell you things that's going to make me look bad, but I wanted to tell my truth so that if a woman finds themselves in the same position that I do, that they don't make the same mistakes, right? And so even when there's clear cut um, instructions, clear cut intention, right? There should be no confusion as to what her intentions were, right? So as the audience, you should know that, hey, this is going to be probably a crazy story, but it's told truthfully and it's told from an honest lens. And despite her giving all of this, prefacing her story with all of this truth and all of these disclaimers, it it never fails. Like, people critiqued her and talked bad about her, talked bad about her family, talked bad about the guy, talked bad about their, like, no matter how much you cling to truth, no matter how much state over and over again. And one of the things I felt was very interesting, and it shows that um, she had a lot of integrity. Is that even when there were moments in the story where things weren't clear, she would dedicate one entire, or at least 50% of one of the episodes to add clarity or to add context, right? And a lot of people don't do that. Let's be real. A lot of people will say whatever they feel will get them likes without the without putting in the effort of adding context. So I was thinking about that. I was like, man, she went through all of this and people were still demeaning her. People were still acting crazy. And so I was like, man, is it worth it? Like, is being your true authentic self worth it? But I thought about it and I was like, no matter what you do, no matter how many disclaimers, no matter how well you set up your story and say, hey, this is me. I might not always get it right, but I'm being true to who I am. People will always find reason to hate, reason to nitpick, reason not to even pay attention to the context and just, create narratives and stories when the truth is right there in front of them. And so now that I know this, now that I come to grips that people might not always understand you, then my next question to myself is, okay, but what about the people that was to where this story was intended? She clearly states at the beginning that I hope that there are people who hear my story and can identify people in their lives who are just like my crazy ex-husband, right? And I think that is what we have to, and that's something that I had to remember, is that there are people here who need to hear what you have to say. There's people who whose lives can only been whose lives can only be impacted positively if you tell your story. Um, I am currently in a wonderful class about being called to pastoral ministry. And one of the things I think that is interesting about this class is one of the first assignments that we had to do is we had to take a moment and embrace our story, right? Embrace every part of our lives from the beginning, the middle, and the continuation of where we are now. And I've told some people close to me this, that for a large portion of at least the last 5 to 10 years, there was a mental separation in my story. There was like an obvious section of my life that I didn't really refer to. Not that it was traumatic, not that it was, or at least to me, it doesn't involve what other people will call traumatic. It's just that, the first 27 years of my life that I spent in Memphis, I am a completely different person now. In 2024, I am a completely different person than I was in 2009 when I left Memphis. But what I think has happened is that along the way, I've kind of forgotten those moments in Memphis that made me the man that I am today, right? The fact that I fell in love with music and Christian music and gospel music all when I was a teenager, when I was a 12-year-old kid listening to um, John P. Key, Salt of the Earth, um, hearing him and Rance Allen come up with crazy harmonies that I never knew existed, right? Those moments, shaped who I am now. Like those church conferences and my friends that I grew up with in the Kojic church. And now that I think about it, like there are some things that I grew up with um, that the judgmental and critical part of my nature was shaped and formed um, back home in Memphis. And I think as I'm trying to, grow and mature, there are certain parts of life that I try not to emulate those habits. Um, so that may be why. But again, I wouldn't be on this journey of self discovery, this journey of growing into the person God made me without, those first 27 years. And so, your story matters. My story matters, right? It's important that I go back and just kind of look at, how my life unfolded, right? The good, the bad, and the ugly. And if I'm honest with how my life has shaped and formed me into today, then I can be a better witness. I can properly utilize my heritage to help somebody else, and that's kind of where things are with me right now. And so, I guess to answer the question, is it worth it? I believe if God has called you to be a content creator, or if your passion is creating content, just make sure that your motive is right, right? Um, it's so funny that one of the other reasons that I decided to resume this podcast is that apparently people are have been missing have been missing these episodes, and I've gotten feedback saying, "Yeah, Brian, like I use these episodes when I'm driving," or you know, people who I didn't even think were listening are listening, right? So, it's just an encouragement just to press through the creative lulls that may come, to press through those times and moments when you feel like you may not have anything to offer the world. Know that there is a space for you. Know that there is a lane that you can navigate toward, or you can even create yourself. One of the beauties of this digital age is that we have the ability to create a lane for ourselves if one isn't there, if there isn't a previous precedent for what you feel like God is calling you to do. You can create that yourself. So you're valuable. You have a purpose and a place, and I believe that it's worth it. We just have to stick to it. All right. Well, that's all I had to say today. Y'all have a great one listening. Please make sure that you subscribe to this podcast. Again, this podcast can be found everywhere where they're available. Um, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Good Pods, they're available everywhere. Again, share this with your family, friends. And until next time, we'll see you when we see you. Bye, y'all. Thank you for listening to the Living from Sunday to Sunday podcast. All episodes are available everywhere where podcasts can be found. Make sure that you like the show, download, and subscribe so you won't miss out on any of the future episodes. Remember, real change happens between Sundays. Talk to you soon.